Welcome to Beer and Bourbon Studios. We are the Game and Drink Connoisseurs, and this is the Game and Drink Connoisseurs podcast. I'm Jessica, and across the table from me is my trusty husband, Bryce.
Trusty, that's a good way to describe me.
Yes, better than lovely, I think.
Yeah, you called me something else last time, very feminine.
I think it was lovely.
Okay, Trusty's good. I like Trusty. Let's stick with Trusty. Anyway, on today's episode, we're doing something we haven't done before on the show. Usually we take a deep dive into one game at a time, but this time we're going to be taking a look at two games that have the same theme and giving them the old compare and contrast. We have Freshwater Fly and Coldwater Crown, both by Bellwether Games, both games about fishing, but we're going to take a look and see what makes them different, what makes them similar, and what we think about both, and more importantly, what you think about both of them.
And with two games comes two drinks. So we're talking about two drinks that go with the theme of fishing, right? Coffee and beer, depending on the time of day and your mood, I suppose. So for the coffee, we have Breakfast Blend by the Roasterie. It's a light roast, and it's got a lot of really interesting breakfasty flavors, so that should be fun. And for our afternoon friends, we have Oak Creek and their Amber Ale. Oak Creek hailing from our lovely home state of Arizona. So a little taste of home for you guys, or of our home anyway.
Speak for yourself, afternoon people. If I'm fishing with beer, I'll do that in the morning.
Fair enough.
Wait until the afternoon. What are you, some type of Puritan?
Well, and to be fair, I'll drink my coffee in the afternoon too. So
yeah, see, there are no rules here.
The only rule is there are no rules, except you're not drinking wine on a fishing boat.
No, that is a rule. No, there are rules. No wine on a fishing boat. So today's episode is pretty jam-packed with games and drinks and nothing for you from behind the bar. However, in fishing, you're always looking for the biggest catch out there on the river or lake. Bigger is better, or so I hear. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the fish featured in today's games and give you their real-life heaviest catch records. So Jess, funny enough, we both grew up in big fishing areas. You off the coast of Maryland, where they do a lot of crab fishing, and then me on the West Coast in Long Beach, where you can do all types of fishing, ocean fishing mostly. However, this is kind of funny. I've only been fishing twice my whole life.
Yeah, I definitely haven't been fishing as much as you would expect from someone who grew up in a fishing place. I don't even know if you would really call crab fishing, although when we would go out fishing for crabs, my grandfather would fish for fish while he waited for the crabs, so it kind of counts.
Yeah, you've done more fishing than me. I've always wanted to get into it, but I don't know, I get seasick, so that's part of it, but then we're not near any like lakes or rivers in Long Beach. You have to drive a considerable distance before you get to anything like that, so it never was a part of growing up for us, but I really would like to get into lake fishing if I could.
It's definitely a very relaxing pastime. I don't like to eat fish, so it's never really been a big interest of mine, but it's certainly fun to be out on the boat and, have a good book while somebody else is maybe fishing for food they're going to eat.
Yeah, you're drinking some beer, you're listening to music until you and I can find a lake, because it's even harder to do here in Arizona, or at least in southern Arizona where we live. We have these fishing games.
Yep, that's the closest approximation for us, and you know what? It works pretty well, I think.
At least for now, yeah. I'm really excited about the coffee and the beer, too. Sedona, Arizona is where the Oak Creek Amber Ale comes from. We took a trip there not too long ago. That was pretty exciting. We'll talk about that later, but this breakfast blend I'm really curious about. A lot of different fruity elements and breakfast elements in it. Light roast, man. This is uncharted territory for us.
Yeah, we're definitely usually dark roast people, so I will be very interested to see how this one fares on our list.
So let's dive in and get going. I have here 2 cups of breakfast blend as well as 2 bottles of Oak Creek Amber Ale. A weird combo, but we're going to make it work today. When we come back, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Freshwater Fly. We've mentioned the game before on our summer episode, but now we're really going to take a look at it. That'll be followed by a deep dive into Coldwater Crown. But first, let us take a minute to learn a little bit more about both of today's featured brews.
From the City of Fountains, Breakfast Blend is a crisp and unique light roast coffee brought to you by the Roasterie. Since 1993, the Roasterie has helped bring Kansas City and the rest of us ethically sourced beans from all over the globe. Many of the Roasterie's coffees are what are known as blends. Blended coffee offers drinkers somewhat of an out-of-the-box experience with their favorite morning brew. While most coffees rely on the natural, smoky, and earthy flavors of their beans, blends take it a step further by infusing the beans with citrus, berries, butter, and other flavor-enhancing ingredients. This might seem kind of strange at first, but when you consider that all coffee beans come from the cherry fruits found on coffee plants, it starts to make a little more sense. Using beans from Colombia, Mexico, and Guatemala, the Roasterie's breakfast blend leans into the naturally acidic tendencies of the coffee fruit by blending in elements of ripe berry and citrus. Using hot air in a luring roaster, these beans are roasted only lightly, which helps those berry and citrus hints stay incredibly clean while making the coffee overall well-rounded and balanced. When drinking this coffee, citrusy aromas should lead up to an incredibly light bitterness, followed by a crisp texture and subtle hints of fruity sweetness. Sounds perfect for an early morning on the lake or river, but is it? We'll find out soon enough. But you can learn more about this blend or any of the close to 200 different coffee varieties made by the Roasterie by visiting their website at theroasterie.com. And if you ever happen to find yourself in the Paris of the Plains, visit one of their 6 coffee shops throughout Kansas City. You can even do tours of their main facility. It'll be hard to miss with the giant airplane on top of it.
Now, maybe coffee and fishing isn't your preferred combo. That's why we also have a beer for you today as well. Coming to you from the beautiful Red Rocky Mountains and Ridges of Sedona, Arizona, is the Oak Creek Brewing Company and their North American Brewers Association Silver Medal Award-winning Amber Ale. Like Pale Ale, Amber Ales are an offshoot of the classic American Ale. This means you can expect a lot of malt flavor and a biting bitterness from the use of Cascade hops. Now, there's not a lot of information out there about just how Oak Creek makes their amber ale the way they do, but we can assume, as with all amber ales, Oak Creek has crafted their beer using a specific balance of classic ingredients to bring out the body, flavor, and texture that give this amber ale its silver medal. Online reviews describe Oak Creek Amber Ale as a fantastically balanced, naturally carbonated brew with a thick malt body kept in check by a mild hop bitterness, which itself is kept in check by a caramel sweetness, kept in check by that malt body. Not to mention a beautiful copper color and mild head that can be enjoyed all day with any kind of savory or even spicy food you can think of. Is it true? Well, we'll find out soon enough. In the meantime, you can go check out all Oak Creek Brewing has to offer by visiting oakcreekbreweryandgrill.com. Given that they are a single location brewery, this beer might be hard to find outside of Arizona, so your best bet might be to come out and pay Oak Creek a visit in person. See why they've been such a popular brewery in Arizona for the last 25 years. And given that Sedona is an absolutely amazing place to check out anyway, I can't think of a reason not to.
In Freshwater Fly, players spend the day in a rushing mountain stream teeming with fish. They must navigate the current, cast accurately, and drift their fly downstream, all in order to reel in the perfect catch. Deliberate strategy and clever puzzle-solving skills will be needed to ensure you catch all the best combos before your opponents. Are you ready to showcase your fly fishing finesse and claim the most ambitious achievements of the day? Freshwater Fly is a push-your-luck style dice drafter with a unique rondelle for action selection by Bellwether Games and is currently selling online for $35 to $50. It plays 1 to 4 players in around 40 to 90 minutes and is recommended for ages 14 and up.
So Jess, I have a strong desire to get on a boat and go fishing. Fly fishing, though, to me seems like a whole different animal.
Yeah, well, it's a lot more work, it seems like. I mean, the fishing I'm used to, you sit in a boat, you put your rod out, and you just kind of wait. Fly fishing, you have to actually do stuff.
A lot of stuff. There's a lot of steps to it that seem really complicated, which is why I'm glad they have a board game about it. In Freshwater Fly, your object is to stand out as the best fisherman on the river.
And the way you do that is by drafting dice and using them to collect valuable skills and items, as well as catching and eventually reeling fish in.
So like most games, you're going to have your main board that everyone plays off of and then your own personal player board. The main board is your giant river, and on this river there's going to be a series of fish cards that are laid out. You're going to have a series of skill cards that are set up to look like rocks along your river board. You're also going to set up a series of momentum tokens that everyone can grab during their turn. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. And then you have hatch tokens, a supply of flies, and even drift tokens. There is a lot of thematic elements on this main board here.
On your player board, you're going to have your reel and then your finesse tracking area where you have a little token that tracks your finesse. It just allows you to do certain different skills. And each player board also has some personal goals, and they're all unique to each board. So you have a combination of your personal goals, and then there's a few communal goals, and that kind of determines how you're going to play your game.
So once you're all set up, everybody chooses a fly token that they want to use to start their game. You grab the allotted number of dice, depending on player count. You give them a roll, and you are ready to start.
So to take your turn, you start by choosing a die. There's 3 different actions you can do with your die, but the first one we're going to talk about is casting. There are 6 columns on the main board, and each column has 3 rows, and they all have either a fish or a skill card, which looks like a rock. And then below each column is a little area for hatch tokens of various colors. So you are going to choose a die and cast into the corresponding column with that number. And so you can choose one of the fish in that column, so long as you have a fly color that matches one of the hatch tokens in that column. Just like on a real river, you would want your flies to match the hatch.
So if your fly matches one of the hatch tokens at the bottom of that column, your opponent to your right is going to shuffle up and then reveal cards from the strike deck. It's a deck of 4 cards, and what this deck tells you is whether or not you've caught a fish. There are 3 cards in there that say you didn't and 1 that says you did. If the first draw of the strike deck reveals that you didn't catch a fish, then you take your casting token and you move it to the left of whichever column you started on. So if you're in column 6, you move to column 5, etc. This is called drifting, and you are able to do it a total of 2 times during your turn when you cast. You also have to automatically drift if you land or start in a column where your fly token does not match anything in the hatch below. The cool and even advantageous thing about drifting is that whenever you do it, 2 strike cards are drawn from the deck instead of 1. And if you're lucky, a successful strike card will be revealed. Whichever fish your casting token is on when that card is drawn, that's the fish you have on your reel now. So you take that card and you put it onto your personal board and get ready to reel that fish in. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. You also take one of the matching hatch tokens from the bottom of that column and you put that over in your player area as well. This is going to do a couple of things for you in the game, including counting towards points possibly at the end.
The next action you could potentially take when you draft a die is the reel action, which you can only take after you have successfully hooked a fish and there's one on your player board ready to be reeled in. The player board has 3 different sections depending on the color of the fish card that you have hooked. Green ones are the easiest, black ones are sort of medium, and gold ones are the hardest. So the hatch token that corresponds with the fish that you took is going to go into a little cutout on your reel, and that cutout is in a handle that actually moves around the reel in a circular motion. The number on the die that you drafted is going to determine how far around your reel you get to move, and that's going to be depending also on the strength of the fish that you have hooked. The strength of the fish is going to be subtracted from the number on the die, and whatever's left is how far you move along the space. Once you've moved all the way around the reel, if you started in the green space, then now you've caught your fish. But if you started in the black or gold areas, you're just going to move along to the next section.
Now you have 5 spaces on your reel, and depending on the die you select will depend on which space you stop at. Whichever space you stop at, you get to do something. And aside from casting and hooking fish, the meat of your game really is in what you take from this reel as you're going around it, because almost everything on this reel is going to give you skills or advantages or tools that will help you win. With all that said, let's talk about the things that you have at your disposal as you move around your reel. The first thing I want to talk about is the drag token. As Jessica mentioned, the drag is the strength listed on every fish card. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it goes all the way up to 3. So what the drag token space on your reel does is it allows you access to your drag token. You take your drag token, you put it on the fish, and it reduces that fish's strength to 0. So whenever you move around your reel now, however many spaces you move it, that's how many spaces he goes. Could be 5, could be 6, could be 2, whatever die you draft.
The second space on the reel gives you the opportunity to grab a momentum token, and you can either take it and use it right away, or you can hold on to it and use it at a later time, and it's basically a free action. So it might give you the opportunity to reel to a certain number or to cast to a certain number, increase your finesse, change the number on a die that you drafted. There's a lot of different things that you could do. The third space gives you an increase to your finesse of 1, and we'll talk a little bit more about finesse in a minute. The fourth space, it depends on what color fish you have on your line. So if it's a green fish, it's actually going to push it forward so that you've now caught it. If it's a gold fish, it's going to push it 1 space backwards. And if it's a black fish, it just stays where it is.
So just like in real fly fishing, finesse is a series of skills at your disposal that you can use to help you better catch fish. As Jessica mentioned, you can add +1 to your finesse while you're reeling your fish in. You can also use your turn to draft a die and add 2 to your finesse tracker. This tracker will hold up to 4 finesse, and depending on how much finesse you have will depend on what you get to do with it as you spend it. You can add +or -1 to whatever die you draft. You can move hatch tokens around between the columns. You can have an extra strike card drawn for you in the column you're in before you drift. You can switch your flies out, and you can even apply your drag token on the current fish you're reeling in without actually having to land on the drag token reel space. You can apply your finesse at any time during your turn, and you can spend as much finesse as you have at your disposal.
One last tool you can use for your advantage are the skill cards, which are the rocks on the river on the main board. So if you hook a fish that comes from a space that's next to a rock, you actually get to draw a skill card from that space, and you get to keep that card until you're ready to use it. Most of them are kind of permanent skills that you can use once per turn. Some of them are one-time skills if they're extra powerful, so once you use it, you have to discard it, and then it's gone for the rest of the game. Once the final die has been drafted and the turn has been taken with it, it's the end of the round. So what you're going to do is the hatch row on the main board is going to rotate down. It actually simulates the river kind of flowing. So you're going to end up with a few new hatch tokens. Some of them are going to move to different spaces, and then you're going to start the new round by rolling the dice once again.
And everyone's going to keep playing round after round until somebody catches their 7th fish. Once that happens, you conclude whichever round you're on, and then the game is over. From there, players are going to tally up all their points, and whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. If there is a tie, then the player with the most gold-colored fish will be the winner. If there's still a tie, then whoever has the most black-colored fish will be the winner, and then the most green-colored fish, and if it's still tied after all that, well, then you just share the victory.
Sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Now we're going to talk about some techniques you can use to win the game. The first thing is to make sure you move at everyone else's pace. Even though some fish are worth more than others, if somebody else is well on their way to having 7 fish and you only have a couple, even if you have some really valuable ones, if they hit 7 and the game is over before you get to finish your long game, that's it for you. Ideally, it's generally a good idea to look for a combination of different levels of fish.
Well, that's how you get a lot of good points, too.
Yeah, I mean, you do want to not just stick to the easy ones, but if someone else is doing that, you might want to jump on board just so that you can keep pace with them and at least have some fish in your basket by the end of the game.
To be honest, you're kind of playing like a giant asshole if you only go for green level fish, but you also don't want to go for only gold level fish. I would not advise this if you want to win. Not only does going after all goldfish take away a lot of points, it also takes a long time to catch these fish, and like Jess said, if somebody's catching a lot of green fish or if people have a good mix going on, you're never going to be able to keep pace with everyone else if you only go after gold level fish, so mix it up.
What you really want to focus on is chasing your personal goals. While there are some communal goals that everyone's going to be going after, the bulk of the points are going to be in the personal goals. And what's great about that is that you're not necessarily going after the same fish as your opponents. And so if you're focusing on that, you're not going to be thwarted when somebody takes something that you were wanting.
That's right. However, there is one fish you do want to keep your eye on because whoever has the most of this fish at the end of the game is going to get 6 points towards their final score. This would be the coho fish, and whenever one of those coho salmon are out there, you at least want to watch what other players have. If everybody has one, you want to make sure you have at least one. You don't necessarily need these 6 points to win, but you definitely want to keep pace with the coho leader or be the coho leader yourself to get those points or at least split those points at the end of the game.
Another thing you definitely want to pay attention to is casting and drifting strategically. One thing you can do is cast into a column where you don't have a matching hatch token. That means you're going to drift automatically, and on your very first cast, you're going to get 2 strike cards instead of 1. The other thing you can do strategically is to look at 3 columns in a row that all have hatch tokens that match what you have. Because what's going to happen is, once you drift, you get 2 strike cards, and then once you drift the second time, if you haven't caught anything yet, there's only 1 card left in the deck. It's a guaranteed catch.
But let's say you're dead set on a particular column. You want that fish, you need that fish. You're going to need finesse in order to make sure you stay in that column and draw additional strike cards. So my advice would be to keep up and use your finesse whenever you can and whenever you need to. Finesse can dwindle very, very quickly if you aren't careful. So you want to spend some time drafting a die in order to give yourself 2 or even landing on that real space to give yourself an additional 1. I would say not using or even collecting finesse could be absolutely detrimental to your game. I think there's many times throughout the game where if you don't have it, you're kind of screwed.
The other thing you really want to pay attention to is collecting the rocks, which are the skill cards, and the momentum tiles. Those are really going to give you different advantages. A lot of the momentum tiles can kind of give you an extra turn, which is really great. It can help you catch up or get ahead of your competitors.
Yeah, those momentum tiles especially are extremely helpful. I would say probably the best thing that they do, especially if you're playing from behind, is they allow you to cast immediately after catching a fish, which is very, very helpful because you don't have to draw a die on your next turn. You can immediately cast. And so if you're down a few fish from the leading fisherman, this is a great way to play catch-up.
One thing we didn't mention earlier is at the end of the round, everyone will add up the total of the dice that they drafted, and whoever has the smallest number is going to go first in the following round. That can be an advantage if you need it, especially if you're playing from behind. But honestly, if you don't need to go first, you don't want to pay too much attention to that. It's better to just take the die that you need and be able to do what you need to do.
It's not too often in the game that the low number dice do a whole lot more for you than the higher number. The higher number gives you a lot more possibilities. It allows you to cast from further out on the board because, and I think we forgot to mention this, if you cast from row 2, if you don't catch something by the time you get to row 1, you just drift out and your turn's over. And also, they allow you to move around that reel faster if you're trying to catch your fish quickly. So like Jess said, go first when you want, but it's really not that important, especially if you have finesse or special skill cards. There's a lot more at your disposal if you play well that will allow you to not have to worry about going first so much.
Okay, you've heard about the game, you've heard how to win, and now you're going to hear what we think of the game, what we like and what we don't like. The first thing we love about this game is that it captures fishing probably better than any other game out there. Certainly better than anything we've ever encountered.
I was thinking about this before we started recording the podcast today. From start to finish, everything about this game has so much to do with fly fishing. From the way the hatch tokens move like the flow of the river, to the way you use finesse and you drift, and you even physically move your reel space around and around to pull the fish closer to you. This game bleeds theme, and it's amazing.
It really does feel like fishing in all the best ways, and it's just really clever the way they were able to pull that off. You have your action in kind of small spurts when it's your turn, but otherwise it's just a waiting game.
Also the repetition of it, right? Like you cast, you catch, you pull them in, you do this, you do that, and then you cast again, and you drift, and you catch. That's fishing. It's done really, really well. Another thing I like about this game is that everyone is playing with different goals. So depending on the reel you have will depend on what goals you're going to chase. And they're similar, like everyone's trying to catch this combo of fish or that combo of fish, but they're different combos. So you're not necessarily going for what your opponents might need, but sometimes you are, and sometimes your fish aren't out there, so you have to make adjustments. But because of the communal goals, this allows the adjustments to be made. So maybe you're not going to capitalize on, let's say, your rainbow trout brown combo, but you can do a different combo on your board or maybe one of the communal goals and make up for it there. And I like that about this game.
I also love the artwork. The artwork on this game is beautiful.
Yes.
The fish are just really well illustrated. It's really just pretty to look at. It's really well done, really cohesive.
However, nothing is perfect, and Freshwater Fly does leave a few things to be desired.
First of all, the race to 7 is not always the greatest. Sometimes it feels like you don't really have enough time to play the game that you want, especially if your opponent is just moving really quickly. It's hard to keep pace and also go for the goals that you want to go for. We were thinking that it might be better if it was played in a series of days or a certain specific number of rounds, maybe even with some added conditions to each round, similar to the game Koi, or there's tons of other games that have that type of mechanic.
This is definitely not the first time we mentioned that mechanic, specifically the way it's used in Koi, because I know we're both big fans of Koi, but I like the way they do it, and I would like to see other games do that. The race to 7, sometimes, especially when someone has a lead or when they're just catching green fish, you're kind of like, what the fuck, you know?
It might actually be a little bit too easy to catch the green fish. And I mean, the game is set up so that you're supposed to go for a variety, but it can be a little frustrating when somebody's just catching fish after fish after fish, just successful every time, and you're going for things that are a little bit more challenging, and it's just not really working out for you.
Now, while those things that we just listed are problematic, I can live with them. The thing that bothers me the most about this game is the coho bonus. I think it's one of the biggest distractions in the game. The fact that I have to go after my own personal goals as well as watch whoever is in the lead when it comes to the cohos, it takes away from my particular real goals, which is where the bulk of your points would be if it wasn't for this giant 6-point reward you get at the end of the game because of the coho lead.
And 6 points is a lot for one thing in this game. Most of the combos and the things you're going after are worth 2, 3, or 4 points. I mean, you have some fish, some of the goldfish that are worth 6 or 7 points, but other than that, you're not really going to see those big points otherwise in the game.
And I do believe there is at least one green coho in the selection of cohos in that deck, but for the most part, they're black and gold, mostly gold. So if somebody has a coho lead and you still need one just to keep up, you're now going to spend perhaps an entire round chasing a gold coho, and again, it's just such a distraction. I don't know why they did that. It does leave a bad taste in my mouth a lot of the time when we play. So as always, Jessica and I researched this game to find out what other people thought about it. It gives us a perspective that maybe perhaps we didn't think about. The biggest praise that Freshwater Fly receives is in its solo play. A lot of gamers are really into this game for the solo experience. I'm not a solo gamer. Jess, I know you're not much of a solo gamer. It's okay. I gave it a shot just so we could talk about it for the episode. To me, it's really tough. You're playing against another fisherman, and this guy's always catching fish, and he's usually grabbing the fish you need. He's usually grabbing the fish that are worth a ton of points, and you just have a hard time trying to keep up with this guy. But in saying that, there is a lot of replay value because you have to do it again and again and again. And it almost kind of works like a video game where you acquire skills as you play, even if you have to reset the day. And the one cool thing about solo mode is it does work in a series of 7 days. You got to try to outfish your, for lack of a better word, like video game terms, computer opponent. You have to outfish him for 7 days straight, and you get stronger as you go. Kind of cool, but again, I'm not a solo gamer, so meh.
That seems like if I was into solo games, that would be what I would want in a game. So it makes sense to me that that's what everybody said, that they really enjoyed that part of it. On a kind of similar token, while everybody loved the solo game, people didn't seem to love this game as much with a higher player account, which makes a little bit of sense to me because it can feel, even though it feels like it's too fast, it also can feel like it's a little bit dragging, too slow if you have more than 2 players. So I would say with 2 players, it's a perfect game. More than that, it's going to drag a little bit.
I think we're very biased in that perspective only because we only play games with each other probably 90 to 99% of the time. I have a hard time with 4-player games anymore because of it.
We don't have the longest attention spans.
That's the other thing.
So, I mean, anything longer than an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we're like, oh God, is it over yet?
The other thing people said was that there aren't that many strategic options. They complained about the repetitiveness of the game. My response to that is that's fishing. We talked about this game being very thematic. There you go. It's a thematic fishing game. It feels like fishing.
I mean, where the replayability in this game comes in is the fish that come out on the main board. You're going to have the same strategies and the same tactics and even the same goals. There's only 4 different player boards, so after a while, you're getting used to the same goals, even if you play with each one. But at the end of the day, the fish that you have at your disposal, that's what's going to make the variety and make it different. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But for us, there's definitely enough variety to make it fun, even in the repetitive nature of the game. The other piece of feedback we've heard is that people don't like that there's not a lot of player interaction in this game. And that's true. There's not a ton of player interaction. It makes it kind of fun. You're doing your own thing. You're focused on your own goals. Aside from the coho thing, you're not really worried about other people interfering with what you're trying to do, which is kind of nice. When you're used to playing a lot of take-that games, maybe that can be boring for you. But for us, it's like a nice little reprieve sometimes to not have to worry about someone else getting in your way.
Again, theme. This game is very thematic. If I were to go out fly fishing, am I going to walk up to a guy down the river, even if we're competing to see who can catch the biggest fish, and punch him in the face? I'm not going to do that.
No, and you're not going to be trying to catch exactly the same fish at the same time. You're going to be, a little upstream, a little downstream, not in the same spot on the river.
Yeah, because your lines are just going to get crossed, and you're going to spend all day trying to untie your lines or have to lose a lot of line because you're cutting it. Thematically, little to no player interaction makes the most sense for this game. So there you have it. That is Freshwater Fly. When we come back, we are going to do it all again with Coldwater Crown, a game that actually takes the weight of the fish you catch into consideration regarding your final score. But first, we take a look at a few fish featured in today's games and give you the real-life records of biggest ones ever caught.
Every year, countless people around the world partake in fishing for purposes of food, leisure, or sometimes both. And like a few other things in life, when it comes to fishing, size isn't everything, but it definitely helps. Anglers are constantly after their next biggest catch, as you are when you play either Freshwater Fly or Coldwater Crown. However, whether in the river, on the lake, or just at your table, you'll be hard-pressed to beat some of these records for biggest fish ever caught, mostly verified through the Guinness Book of World Records. The largest cutthroat trout ever recorded came in at 41 pounds. The heaviest rainbow trout was 48 pounds. Coho salmon, 33 pounds. The heaviest pike weighed in at an impressive 55 pounds. Speaking of impressive, 25 pounds is the record weight for heaviest flounder. For context, flounder usually weigh somewhere around 1 pound. Not sure what nuclear power plant that fish was caught near though. And the record for largest steelhead trout is a 50-year-strong, unbroken 42 pounds, made even more impressive when you consider it was caught by an 8-year-old boy. And just how much meat do fish of most of these sizes yield? Well, consider that the average piece of salmon steak is roughly 4 to 6 ounces, or a quarter to a third pound. Doesn't sound like you'll be running out of dinner anytime soon. However, I'd think twice before cutting up that 25-pound Chernobyl flounder.
Coldwater Crown, players have secured themselves a spot as competitors in this world-renowned fishing tournament. Very little is certain on these frigid waters, but it's a guarantee the fish will be biting. By casting the right bait at the right time while also balancing their efforts in several different bodies of water, players will do their best to catch the biggest fish and collect a series of achievements in order to take home the gold. Coldwater Crown is a strategic placement set collector also by Bellwether Games and can currently be found online for around $43. The game is designed for 1 to 4 players, plays in roughly 45 to 90 minutes, and is recommended for ages 14 and up. So here we have another fishing game made by Bellwether Games, but this one is completely different from Freshwater Fly.
Yeah, the style is totally different. It's more, well, it takes place in a competition, so it's a lot more competitive, I guess you could say.
There's definitely a competitive atmosphere to it, yeah.
And it's just a totally different type of game.
Absolutely. In Coldwater Crown, the object is to, well, win the Coldwater Crown.
The way you do that is by strategically maneuvering angler tokens and bait to catch a variety of fish in order to win the different trophies within the competition.
So the main board in this game is going to be where the majority of the action takes place. It's divided into 4 different sections. You have your lake, river, shore, and port location. At each of these locations, you're going to be able to catch different types of fish, and they all sit in 4 different zones on the lake, river, and shore, but the port location is its own special deck off the board of different type of fish you can catch. You're going to have a bait bag off to the side and various trophies scattered throughout the board as well. And then you also have this little tag token that comes in one of 5 different colors that you select, and you place that on the board as well, and that will come into effect a little later on in the game.
So your player board looks like a tackle box. It's got 4 different numbered zones on it. It actually matches the different zones in the lake, river, and shore fishing areas on the main board. And then you also will get an angler token that you'll use to play the game. And you start with a piece of tackle, which is just a random tool. There's a couple of different kinds that will help you out throughout the game.
Everyone is going to fill up zones 3 and 4 of their tackle board with bait drawn randomly from that bait bag. You're going to put 3 angler tokens on the main board, 1 in each of the 3 main fishing locations. That's the lake, the river, and the shore. And then you are ready to go.
Okay, this game is a little bit confusing to explain, so
Yes,
bear
it
with
is.
us.
We're going to do our best here.
Okay, so to start off, the angler tokens are double-sided.
They're like little coin-shaped tokens.
Yeah, so it's a 1 on one side and a 2 on the other. And at the start of the game, all the angler tokens are on side 1, which is good. That makes it easy from the beginning.
Right.
So when you play an angler token with the side 1 action, you get to remove 1 piece of bait from every zone in your tackle box, corresponding to the color on the spot where you've played it.
Yeah, we should mention that the lake, river, and shore each have 2 sections for these tokens to go on, and each of these sections is its own separate color. So you have 6 different colors, and each one of these colors corresponds to the color of the bait pieces that you're drawing out of the bag.
And this is specifically the main fishing zones, the lake, the river, and the shore. The port location is a different beast. We will talk about that in a minute.
Yes.
So you start the game by placing your token on an available section on the main board. So there's 3 angler tokens already there, so you can't use those ones that are already covered. But let's say, for example, you put your number 1 token down on the blue section. Now what you do is you take 1 blue piece of bait from every zone in your board and you remove it. Yeah, this is tricky.
It is. I think we're doing a good job, though. Okay, so you've laid down your first angler token, side 1. Now you are going to pick another angler token that was already on the board, and you're going to take it from wherever it was, and you're going to perform that action. So let's say you dropped your first angler token, side 1, on the purple space, which would be the shore fishing area. You remove some purple bait from your board, and then you picked up the token on, say, the black space, which would be the river. You take that token, you perform the same action only with the black bait colors off your board, and then what you're going to do is you're going to flip that token over so the side 2 is showing, and then the next time it's your turn and you drop the token, you can now use the side 2 actions.
Just to clarify, you're going to take the action based on whatever is facing up on the token that you grab. So if it was already with side 2 up, then you would start with side 2, flip it over, and then your next turn you do side 1.
Right. We were explaining how the start of the game works, but that is correct. The tokens are going to flip as the game goes. Some are going to be side 1, some are going to be side 2.
Yes. So the side 2 is very similar to side 1, but instead of removing 1 piece of bait from that color from every zone, you're going to remove every single piece of bait from that color from your entire tackle board.
This is essentially the meat of the game. The trick is to use side 1 and 2 advantageously to clear bait off your board to correspond with the fish you are trying to catch. That's what the whole game's about. And it's trickier than explaining the game. It's trickier to figure that out than it is to explain the game on a podcast.
Yeah, this one would be a lot easier to explain with a visual aid, for sure.
But this is an audio format, so whatever, man, we're trying. So that's how the lake, the river, and the shore work. The port space works a little differently.
The port space only has one section for an angler token, but there are two different things you can do at the port space. Side 1 allows you to do either one of those things one time. Side 2 allows you to do it twice. You can either do the same thing twice or one of each. The two things you can do at the port are replenish your bait or grab a Master Angler card. So replenishing the bait is basically filling up any one of your empty zones. So one zone is one action. And the zones, they're numbered 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the number of the zone tells you how many pieces of bait goes in that zone when you fill it up.
That's on your tackle board, your own personal thing.
Yes, correct. 3 and 4 are where you start. They're a little bit easier to empty, but 5 and 6 actually give you some special bonuses. So you don't want to necessarily neglect those ones just because they take a little bit longer to empty. The Master Angler cards are cards that have different fish on them, and they also have pictures of bait on them. And what you can do with those is you can set them in your play area, and when you remove bait from your board, you can actually place them on the Master Angler cards instead of just back in the general discard. And once you fill up all the bait spaces on a Master Angler card, you've caught that fish. And they're not worth as much as the main fish of the game, but they can give you a couple of little bonuses towards the end.
So let's talk about those bonuses that Jessica mentioned just a second ago. When you empty Zone 5 on your tackle board, you get one piece of tackle drawn randomly from the tackle pile, and depending on which one you get, will depend on which bonus you get to use. One will allow you to move bait right off of your board, another one will allow you to catch a fish from the river even if you're in the lake, things like that. The Zone 6 bonus gives you the option to not grab a fish from the 6th zone in whatever area you're in, but straight off the top of the deck. Maybe you have too many salmons already and you want to grab a rainbow trout, what have you, you can do that if you clear Zone 6 out.
So you basically just keep playing those angler tokens, catching those fish, collecting trophies along the way until you reach the end of the game. And there's a lot of different trophies scattered all over the main board for different kinds of accomplishments. So if you're the first person to achieve an accomplishment, you get the most points, and then the second person gets a little bit fewer points, and so on and so forth. The end of the game is triggered once somebody has caught 12 fish. And as soon as that happens, everybody gets to take one more turn, and then we start judging the contests for the shore, the lake, and the river. For each location, you're going to select the heaviest fish of each species and add all those weights together. The weights are then compared for each player. Whoever has the highest total weight in that area is going to win the first place trophy, and so on and so forth.
So for example, if you were at the lake and you caught 2 or 3 different pike fish and only one perch, you would use your heaviest pike and your perch, and that would be the weight you submit to the contest for that region.
Right, so then you do that for the river and the shore. You assign all the trophies, and then everybody will just add up all the points on all of their trophies. You also will get 1 point for every fish that was submitted to the contest that has a tag on it matching the color of the tag on the main board, and then you get 1 point for every Master Angler fish that you caught. And whoever has the most points is the winner. If for some reason you have scores that are tied, what you're going to do is take all the fish that have a tag that matches that tag that was on the main board, and each of those tags has a timestamp written in it. So whoever has the fish that has the earliest timestamp on their tag, and only the ones that match the color on the board, that's going to be the person who wins.
In most games, that's not going to apply because it's really hard to match up that tag with the fish you submit in the competition. So most of the times, if you have a tie, you're just going to share the victory.
Sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
So now that we know how to play, hopefully, we've explained that coherently, let's talk about how to win.
My first piece of advice, catch a variety of different fish in every zone. Do not just catch all John Dory fish on the shoreline. They look really cool, but you want a John Dory and a flounder, and you want perches and you want pikes. You want to catch a lot of different fish because you only get to submit one of every species when you weigh them in. So if you have 6 pikes, okay, really cool, but you only get to submit one of them. So make sure you catch a variety of different fish because the more you catch, the more you can submit, and the better chance you have then of being the heaviest catch of the day and winning that particular trophy in each area.
That being said, you do want to be adaptable. In this game, you want to change course as needed because depending on where the angler tokens are placed on the board and what color bait you have in your different zones, you might not have a whole lot of options as far as what you can do. And it's definitely better to do something than to just waste a turn because you're holding out for a specific fish.
So yeah, in that case, if you do have to catch a second pike, you're making lemonade out of lemons because no two fish will weigh the same. So maybe you'll get a heavier one when you go for a second or even third fish if you're forced to do that.
And don't be discouraged by the second or third place trophies, especially in the weight contests, because there's still points. And if somebody has first place, even in all those 3 contests, you could still end up coming out on top. Alternately, if you didn't grab any of those first place trophies during the game, you might still be on top in the weight contests. You don't really know until you get to the end.
I'll tell you what else you don't want to do. Don't focus too heavily on those master angler cards. Take them when you can, use them when you can, but focus on getting your bait off your board to catch the fish you need rather than getting your bait off your board to put them on the master angler cards. They are only worth 1 point apiece at the end, and yes, it can be the tiebreaker, but during the game, you don't want to get rid of your purple bait just to get it on your angler card if it's not advantageous for you to remove your purple bait just yet. So keep that in mind. Take them when you can, but they're not overly necessary.
What is necessary, or at least very useful, is the tackle. You really want to take advantage of the tackle every chance that you get. It can be tempting to just focus on zones 3 and 4 because they're super quick to empty, so you think, oh, I'm going to catch a lot of fish really fast. But zone 5, getting that extra tackle can be a huge difference, especially when it allows you to catch things in different areas or different zones. It can really help you be a little bit more flexible and still accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
It can also put you in a really good spot to take the lead in any given area for the weigh-in. You definitely want to refresh your zone 5, but you know what? You want to refresh all your zones often. You don't want to get stuck without bait to take off your board because then you don't have anything to do on your turn.
Oh yeah, if you start a turn with completely empty zones and there is already a token in the port space, you basically waste your first turn because all you can do is put it in one of the fishing regions, but there's no bait to remove. So you're just putting your token down and wasting it.
Yeah, don't do that. The other thing you don't want to do is be too worried about the pace of the game. And we mentioned this because pace in Freshwater Fly was really, really important. You wanted to keep pace with the person who had close to 7 fish. You wanted to match them. Here, you don't have to worry about that as much. Be mindful if a player is getting close to 12 fish, but you don't have to worry about it as much as you would in a game like, say, Freshwater Fly. Catch the fish you want to catch, do your thing. By the time the game ends, everyone's going to have around 12 fish anyway, and keep in mind it's more about the weight of the fish you catch than the number.
Absolutely. And that trophy for being the first to 12, I think it's only worth like 2 points, so it's really not even that big of a deal.
Yeah, the heaviest fish on the lake or the river or the shore is worth 5, so that's definitely one you want over the 2 points you get from catching 12 first. All right, so let's talk about some of the things we liked and did not like about Coldwater Crown. For me, first and foremost, I love the championship aspect and feel of this game. It's a competition. You're out on the water, you're catching fish, you're collecting them, you're weighing them in. There's trophies all over the place. It just screams competition and championship, and I love that.
It definitely gets your competitive juices flowing, but there's not a ton of player interaction, so it's like a really interesting combination there.
There are some light take that elements, which is kind of cool because it sways your decision making some. Like if somebody puts a token on the space you needed and now you can't really do it, but you're right, there's not too much going on.
What I really love about this game is the mystery of it. At any given point, you really have no idea who's in the lead because no matter how many fish you have or your opponents have or what fish they have, you don't actually know the weights of them. That's kind of something we didn't really mention before is when you pick up your fish that you catch, you kind of flip it over secretly and that's where you see the weight and also the tag. So only you know what you've got in terms of how heavy the fish are and how many of them are going to be those 1 point tag matches. And what's great about that mystery is that you don't get caught up focusing on where your opponents are versus where you are and worried about, oh, I'm way behind, I got to catch up, or, I'm in the lead so I can be cocky. You kind of have to be on alert and on your A game the whole time. But you also almost can't get discouraged because there's no real way of knowing who's in the lead.
That brings us right to the next thing I like about this game is mechanically it's very, very simple. You place a token down, you move some bait pieces, you pick a token up, you move some bait pieces, you collect some fish. I mean, it's a very easy, simple game, but what bait do I empty? What fish do I go for? Do I have the heaviest fish? This pike only weighs 3 pounds. Should I go for a heavier one? I like a game that can be so mechanically simple but pack such a punch in how you work that simplicity out to your advantage.
And in that, there are a variety of ways to score, right? Because there's so many different approaches that you can take. You can really go for the high weight in all of the different regions, or you can go for some of the other trophies and really focus all your weight on one particular region, or just try to make sure you have a good variety. There's just a lot of different approaches that you can take. You can really focus on the Master Angler cards, although I don't really see anyone winning doing that, but you could try.
Yeah, it's definitely, like we said, suggested that you spread out the type of fish you catch, but you don't always have to focus on the lake. You can move to the river for a while, then come back to the lake. There's different ways you can collect your fish, which is really cool.
And really helpful, considering you don't really have a lot of control over what bait's going to come into your zones.
So, for all we like about it, there are some things that Coldwater Crown does leave to be desired. The first thing I want to mention, Jess, is this tag timestamp tiebreaker thing. It's really random. To me, it's a distraction, and even in the rulebook, the game admits that it's a distraction and gives you a variant to where you can take it out. It's kind of a bullshit way to break a tie. Like, okay, first, the fish that you submit to the weigh-in have to have that same color on it, but what if that's not your heaviest fish? So I'm not going to submit that fish, but let's say you do, and your weight is the same with the person next to you, and because they have a time on their card earlier than the one on yours, they win?
Yeah, it's totally random. I would think maybe you would want to break the tie with like whoever has the most trophies, or maybe even the most with the tag color that matches. But looking at the timestamp it's really weird, especially because the timestamp is not at all a part of the game ever, except in the rare event of a tie. The weight of the fish is also a little bit random, and that's part of the fun, but it's also a little frustrating. Like in real life fishing, you can use certain bait and certain tricks to make sure you get a heavier weight. So if maybe there was a tackle option that you could use to like increase the weight of a fish you caught or something along those lines. I mean, I realize that it's a little complicated with the way that the game is done. I mean, there's decks for each area. The fish cards are drawn randomly. You can't really be like, oh, we're going to draw from this heavier weight deck or whatever. But it would be nice if there was something you could do to affect the weight of the fish that you catch.
And you know what else, now that I think about it? The tackle is drawn randomly from the bag as well when you do gain that tackle bonus. I have found myself playing this game where I empty my zone 5. It's not the easiest zone to empty while catching a fish you need at the same time. And you draw from the tackle bag and, oh, here's a piece of tackle I can't use. Don't see when I'm going to have a use for it because of the way I already have this fish or the way my zone's set up. Whatever the case may be, it'd be better if you were able to select the tackle you need instead of drawing it randomly. House rule fixes that, I know, but as the rules are written, not my favorite thing about it. Now let me ask you something. What did you think about the bait? Did you find it to be weird? Because I found it to be really pretty, but really weird. I
mean, it is definitely very pretty.
They're like these colorful little crystals.
Yeah, they look like gemstones.
Right.
It's gorgeous. It's fun. They, fit nicely in the bag and on the board. And it reminds me a little bit of like a really colorful tackle box, but it's not. I mean, the bait is usually like dead worms and stuff, so that's not colorful, and it's definitely not gemstones.
It doesn't really fit in the game, I would say. Like, it doesn't make you feel like you're fishing when you're just pulling little gemstone colorful pieces out of a bag.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of goes with the fact that it's a tackle box, because you do see a lot of really bright colored pretty things in a tackle box, but I don't know, those are also like squishy things, so I don't know. All that said, this is really just getting really nitpicky, right? These are the super little details if we could have a perfect game in a perfect world. But we really do enjoy this game. We play it all the time. We really like it.
One of those games, again, where the goods outweigh the bads by far.
Absolutely. So when we were researching for this episode, we put out some feelers, we asked for opinions, and one thing that we heard is that it doesn't really feel like fishing.
Agreed. It doesn't feel like fishing with all the tokens and the bait being kind of not really fitting. I mean, the artwork of the fish is pretty cool, and the weigh-in does feel real competitive, but you don't get a lot of fishing out of this game.
That said, I mean, I think it makes it a little bit more accessible to people who aren't necessarily into fishing.
True. I think people who like that light Euro feel will like this even if they don't like fishing. So that's a good point. Now for others, though, the fact that it didn't feel like fishing and the fact that it is a very light Euro-style game, people found it to be too repetitive, and without that feeling of fishing, it just didn't hook them in. And that is fair. You do have to like that kind of light Euro feel in order to enjoy this game, whether or not you like fishing, I would say.
I think that's true. It's definitely a style that you have to be into, for sure.
The other thing, too, that competition, the weigh-in thing, if that really snags you, I think this game will still work for you. But I think people might have wanted it to be something it isn't. I think it is supposed to be just kind of a basic Euro-y kind of game with cool fish on it. And for that, I think it does it really well. I think people were looking for something a little more complicated, and you just weren't going to get that here.
I would agree with that. Now, what about the solo mode?
I tried the solo mode for a few rounds. Again, solo's not my thing. If you like solo mode, you're probably going to like this. The solo mode in Coldwater Crown has a lot to do with the bait that you pull out of the bag for lack of a better word, computer character. I'm using video game terms. I don't know what the board game terms are. But you pull bait out of the bag, and then it lines up with where that character is going to do his fishing. But when I played it solo, the way it came out was he's always catching a fish. And so you pull the bait out, and then he goes to a certain location, and then bam, he catches a fish. And you're like, oh, I still have 6 pieces of bait to get rid of before I can catch one. And then he catches the fish that you want, and then you're like, oh, son of a bitch. And trying to keep up with him is just really, really tough. Bellwether, I would say, does a good job at making solo modes that you have to play again and again because it's tricky. Not for me. If you like solo, you're going to like it.
Yeah, as solo modes go, I think this one's pretty popular. We got a lot of positive feedback from others about this one.
Yeah, people really seem to enjoy it online. That's like the highest praise they gave in the game was for the solo mode.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't tried the solo mode for this one, but I think I would like it. I really enjoy that kind of heightened challenge, so seems like a good version of the game.
It's one of those things where you have to do it again and again and again, and that's kind of what I don't like about solo mode. Does that bother you, having to do like the same thing over and over just to try to like win that round or win that day?
I don't know. In video games, I hate that.
Same. That's why I don't like solo board gaming.
But in a board game, I think I would actually like it because it's more like solving a puzzle than like trying to run through a thing and falling in the same hole over and over and realizing that it's a dexterity issue.
I'm just so tempted to just cheat. Like if I pulled a bait out of the bag and it was the color green and then he took the green fish I wanted, I'm going to be like, he didn't pull the green out of the bag. He pulled the red out of the bag instead. That's my problem with solo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're playing by yourself, who's going to know you cheated?
Exactly. We're terrible. Freshwater Fly and Coldwater Crab. 2 games about fishing. But which game will reign supreme? Okay, so we've talked about both games now. Jess, do you have a favorite over the other?
Oh, that's a tough question. I really like both of them. I think it's got to depend on the mood that I'm in.
I can't figure it out. I've thought about this long and hard, and like you said, it really all depends on my mood. I like having both games because they bring something different to the table when you play them, so I don't want to choose between them, personally. And so I'm not going to. That's just what it is. But for the purposes of comparing and contrasting, I would say that both of these games are simple but effective. I think there's a lot of randomness to them. And I think the simplicity and randomness might be a little too simple and random for some people, which risks a low replay value, which might turn some people off. I think you really need to enjoy fishing to like these games, personally.
I think that could be true. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of fishing, and I really like them, but there is a sort of nostalgic factor with fishing for me, so maybe that could sway me a little bit. They both have really impressive artwork, though. I love the look of them. Aesthetically, they're beautiful. The bait in Coldwater Crown, while kind of random, is really nice to look at. They're just really well made, and they're a great price point, too. Both a little under $50, which is reasonable, I think, for what they are.
I think the price is reasonable, but I do think you still have to like fishing to justify what was Coldwater Crown, $35, and Freshwater Fly was like 45 to 50. I think given the randomness and the repetitiveness of both games, you have to still like fishing to justify that price point, considering what else you can get out there for $50. I like the games a lot because I enjoy the concept of fishing. I'm trying to be as unbiased here as possible, but yeah, unless you like fishing, I still think at that price, you might be able to find something better if you don't like fishing.
That's probably true. Something that's more along your interests, for sure.
For sure.
Freshwater Fly, I think, is a lot more thematic.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot more theme going on in that game, whereas Coldwater Crown, I would say, is more mechanically driven.
Yeah, that's definitely a great way to kind of, in a nutshell,
separate the two a little bit. Like if you had to choose one over the other, if you like mechanics, maybe go with Coldwater Crown, or if you like theme, go with Freshwater Fly. I would say that whole competition atmosphere in Coldwater Crown is really appealing, though.
Yeah, well, and it's also got a lot of just sort of basic Euro elements, which I think is going to appeal to a lot of people as well.
I think Freshwater Fly also might be a nicer looking game. And maybe it's because the fish take up more room on the cards than they do in Coldwater Crown. The cards are like really small, so you don't see as much fish. But maybe if you like the aesthetics to a game, Freshwater Fly might do it for you.
It's possible. I mean, and it's got that whole like reel thing with the player board.
Yeah, like you're spinning the reel and it feels like you're fishing more. Yeah. Although Coldwater Crown, I think, has a lot more going on because in Freshwater Fly, you're playing off of your own board. And while you're all fishing from the same river, there's a plethora of fish for you to choose from. Whereas in Coldwater Crown, you got 3 locations and you're putting tokens down, which means you're kind of getting in each other's way a little more. So there's a little more interaction there. And that might be exciting to some people.
Yeah, you're definitely a lot more limited on what you can do, and what you do has a greater impact on what your opponents are then able to do.
And with that said, I think a higher player count in Coldwater Crown makes the game a little more interesting, if not more exciting, whereas in Freshwater Fly, because of those overly repetitive mechanics, you want a lower player count in that game. So if you are the type of person who plays with a lot of people, you like playing with a lot of people, Coldwater Crown might be more your thing, whereas if you don't mind playing with a lower player count, Freshwater Fly might be more for you.
Definitely keep those things in mind if you're looking to make a choice between these two.
However, again, gun to my head, this is why we own both.
Yeah, and both are great, honestly, with 2 players or 4 or more, maybe. Can they play more?
No.
Oh, just
Only
4
4
then.
players, yeah. You're really not going to go wrong with either of these. Hopefully we've given you enough information for you to decide what will be best for you and your table. All right, so like we had 2 games, we also have 2 beverages. We are going to start with the Roasterie's Breakfast Blend. Jessica, this was the first coffee we've had on the show that was not just a regular roast, this was a blend coffee. So a lot of different ingredients going on in this thing that you normally don't find in a regular cup of coffee. What did you think?
It's definitely a very complex flavor. There's a lot of tartness in the flavor. It has the normal kind of bitterness of black coffee, but it's fruity, which is really surprising.
So we know coffee beans come from something that they call a coffee cherry, which isn't really a cherry. It's more of like a berry type of fruit. And then they put additional berries in this, and it's almost like all that berry flavor is right there in every sip, and it's right up front, too.
I mean, if you put creamer in it, it kills it. But when it's black, it's very, very berry heavy.
Yeah, there's a lot of tartness there, and then the bitterness, too. And they blend okay, I think, when you drink it black. We did put creamer in it. I thought it was a horrible idea. It weirdly makes it smell like butter, and then the buttery smell with like the cream and the bitterness and the muted berry flavor, it just was gross. I wouldn't recommend this with creamer if you were going to drink it.
I didn't mind it with the cream. I liked it because the cream kind of tamps down the tartness, and I'm not a huge fan of tartness. I kind of make that sour face a little bit. So it tamps it down for me, but it does also kill a lot of the flavor. So you kind of just have like a little sweetness, and then you have that sharp, nutty bitterness at the end, and that's kind of it.
If I were to try that with the creamer, and we used the Natural Bliss sweet cream because we thought maybe berries and cream, might go together. If I were to wear a blindfold and try that, I honestly don't know if I could tell you I was drinking coffee.
I mean, you can. The coffee comes in at the very end with that kind of sharp bitterness, but yeah, it's not traditionally coffee.
But in fairness, it's not traditionally coffee just by itself black either. The idea of blended coffee is definitely not a drink I'm used to, for sure. I don't know about you. Have you ever had anything like that before?
Not that I know of. I mean, I always kind of drown it in sugar and cream anyway, so I'm not sure.
Really matter.
Yeah, I don't think I would have known either way.
So let's break down the anatomy of a sip. I think that would help people understand exactly what they're getting themselves into when they drink this.
First, when you smell it, it has a very fruity aroma, very citrusy, a little bit of earthiness. I thought it was a little nutty.
I think that's the light toasted bean that you're smelling. Like you can smell the roast a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little toasty, a little roasty.
And then you take the sip and immediately you're hit with this snap of like ripe berry, sort of like really strong tart, almost kind of sour type of flavor. And then in the back end of every sip, you're going to get that bitterness.
And the bitterness comes in sharply. It's a little unpleasant, I think, but it's quick. It's over quick. It's not too bad.
Now, does that have something to do with the fact that this is a light roast, so it's a little more acidic than what you might be used to? Is that what you're tasting? Could that be what it is?
I do think so, because I think I find that same sort of unpleasant sharpness in most light roast coffees.
Okay, fair enough. I actually thought this coffee was really good black. I think it's different because of that blend. I think you get a lot of berry flavor. It's not my favorite cup of coffee in the world, but I'm a dark roast guy myself. For a light brew, I found it to be really interesting and unique. I find that the flavors kind of come one after the other in every sip, and so your palate kind of takes this interesting journey that you don't quite expect for coffee, but it doesn't necessarily take you out of the realm of coffee either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. It's just that one little bit of sharpness that I don't like about it. I thought it was okay with the creamer, but as I said, it does kill a lot of the flavor.
I think this coffee is a brew designed to be enjoyed black because of all that citrus in it, because you don't think citrus when you think coffee. Citrus is light, it's crisp, it's bright. Coffee is usually very dark and bold and earthy, and you get a lot of chocolate in there, and so when you think chocolate and earth and stuff, cream seems to make more sense both on the palate and just in your mind, you know?
Yeah, this almost reminds me of like an herbal tea, but way bolder.
That is actually a really good way to describe this coffee blend. It does remind you of an herbal tea, especially because it has such an aroma within every sip. Like the aroma is part of the drinking of this coffee.
And like most herbal teas, I think you're right. It's probably designed to be enjoyed on its own. And the name Breakfast Blend is very fitting. It's very breakfasty. It's got that crisp berryness, and you think of fruit at breakfast time. It just makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but you're right. If you were going to have this coffee at any time of day, breakfast would be my suggestion. So there you go. So then let me ask you, Breakfast Blend by the Roasterie, would you recommend it?
Not to someone who likes to drown their coffee in cream and sugar, but somebody who really enjoys coffee, someone who will drink it black, I would definitely recommend it.
I would as well. If you are an adventurous coffee drinker, even if you're not a fan of light roast, there is enough going on in this light roast thanks to that acidity and tartness and that snap from the berry flavor. It's going to take you on a wild ride, and I think it's something that coffee drinkers are going to enjoy, even if light roast isn't their particular roast of choice.
So we've had our coffee. Now let's talk about the Oak Creek Amber Ale.
I got to tell you, as far as amber ales go, this is my all-time favorite. I love this beer. I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. I'm not a huge beer person, but as beers go, it's definitely not the worst.
Well, it's by far not the worst. The thing with amber ales is you have three main ingredients. You have your toasted malt, you have your Cascade hops, and you have your caramel. And what separates one amber ale from another is how much caramel they add in comparison to how much hops they add, and how toasted their malts are versus how long they let the hops sit in the brew when they're boiling it.
So how do you think it all balanced out in the Oak Creek Amber?
I would say perfectly, honestly, as far as amber ales go, because, again, this is probably just a personal thing. We all know I'm not a big fan of, like, sweet beers. I think Oak Creek has the hop to malt to caramel ratios down perfectly. I think they found a balance. I think one keeps the other in check so nothing gets too out of control. And whether you're drinking it cold or at room temperature, it doesn't lose it. Like some beers change in flavor when they get warmer or colder. This one stays fairly consistent. So I would say, in my opinion, they found the perfect balance between those three ingredients, and you get a really solid beer, whether you're drinking it from a bottle or out of a glass.
It does taste pretty well balanced. For me, I can still taste the hops in it like a little bit more than I would like, but it is really smooth. The caramel, I mean, I like sweeter stuff a little bit more than you do, so maybe I could use a little bit more of that. But generally speaking, I think it is a really well-balanced beer for sure.
I noticed that with this particular amber, the caramel sits kind of in the back of the sip. You get the malt and the toastiness right up front, and then I think you get the bitterness, and then I think as the sip goes down, that's when you kind of get the caramel flavor, but it's more of like an aftertaste aroma. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think that's a great way to describe it.
So maybe that's why the hops are coming out extra for you, because you don't get that sweetness that you prefer right up front. It's more of like an aftertaste. So now let's talk about the color, because I think the color of this beer is really interesting as well. When I think amber ale, I think more gold, but this one is way more like copper colored.
Well, that's where it gets the name amber ale, right? Because it's got that amber hue traditionally.
Well, isn't amber like a gold?
Yeah, it's like a yellowy, orangey kind of color.
Yeah, but this is like a deep copper almost. It's almost as deep red as the mountains of Sedona. So you want to call it a red ale just by looking at it, but it doesn't taste anything like a red ale. It doesn't have anywhere near the hop flavors. It's truly an amber ale. It just doesn't look like it. But you know what's funny is that the color of the beer and the flavor of it make a lot of sense. Like, I wouldn't associate something that's a little more traditionally amber colored with the taste of this beer. So I think it works.
Yeah, it does work. And of course, how appropriate that it's got that redder hue matching the red rocks of Sedona, right?
Yeah, if you've never been to Sedona, it is just solid red canyon cliffs all around. I had the opportunity also to actually sit in Oak Creek. When I went out for that hike, I know you weren't feeling that well that day, so I went out for that hike and I actually had the chance to sit in the waters of Oak Creek. I don't know if that's where they get their water. I certainly hope not, considering the area of Oak Creek I sat in was a little muddy, but it was a really awesome opportunity to just sit in the area where they get their name, where they take their influence, to take in all that nature and then have a beer at the same time, knowing that this is truly a taste of Arizona. It's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like you really got the full experience of the beer.
I really did, yeah.
And I would say, definitely give this beer a try, but if you have the opportunity to try it in Sedona, highly recommend it.
I 100% agree. This is the kind of beer where you come out here, you drink it, you soak in all the environment around you and really get a feel of what Arizona life is, at least in that region of Arizona. I will say this about Sedona, not trying to be offensive, but it is a little bougie, just a heads up. It's definitely not our vibe, but to visit, it's really quite wonderful.
Well, it's a little weird. Like, everything there is very kind of high-priced and fancy, but the people aren't very bougie. It's a very laid-back, relaxed kind of vibe with the people you talk to. But then you walk into the shops, and the price points are a little bit outrageous.
And that's even in the actual town where the residents shop, too. I would agree with you about the people there, although I must say when we were walking around, even in like the regular type town, I remember turning to you and going, you know what? I guarantee you at least a dozen people at any given time, wherever we are, they like coffee enemas. It's that level of bougie, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit new age kind of, with the vortexes, and so it's all very like crystals and coffee enemas, I guess, if those things go together.
Funny story. We went to one of those vortexes. We climbed up the little trail to the vortex, and it was supposed to bring out like feminine energy or whatnot. And I remember you saying something along the lines of, yeah, I don't feel a fucking thing. And I was all like, yeah, it kind of works like Santa Claus. You have to believe in it for it to be a thing. That in itself not as funny, but the fact that everyone else around us heard us, and we were like, ooh, whoops. We said that a little too loud. I thought that was funny. So yeah, go to Sedona, go to Oak Creek, try the beer, the amber ale specifically. They got a lot of good beers there. My favorite's the amber. This is a tremendously awesome, well-balanced beer, and I don't think you're going to find an amber ale that does it better.
That's all we have for today. Thanks for listening. I know it was quite a mouthful, but hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I can't with you. One bottle of beer. One.
I have no excuses.
No, you don't. No shame either, evidently.
Anyway, as always, we would love to hear what you think about today's games and today's brews if you've tried them. So go ahead and leave a comment wherever you're listening and keep the conversation going.
And while you're leaving comments, as always, one bottle of beer, Jess. As always, take time to rate the show if you find it of value. 5 stars is the only acceptable number of stars. We've said it before, we'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it until I see them.
Let me see those stars!
Yeah. And, if you find the show to be of true value, share it with your friends, like, subscribe, all those things. Next week, well, we don't quite know yet. We have a couple of different things we're working with. Not really too sure which way it's going to go, but, we'll have something.
Yeah, so you'll find out a little bit later than we do.
Probably not much later, though.
Yeah.
We were a little behind. Life and other things happened. You know how it goes. But either way, until next week, whatever we end up talking about, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll catch you next time.
I've been Jessica. This has been Bryce. And this has been the Game and Drink Connoisseurs podcast.
Oh, yeah. I guess I should have said that. All right. Now we'll catch you next time.